Hello, I'm Julian, and welcome to the first video in this 5-episode series, where we will explore the entire painting process of this Fyreslayer dwarf. We'll start with the skin and overall anatomy, capturing the essence of the figure. Then we'll delve into the fiery elements such as the hair, beard, runes, and eyes, bringing them to life with vibrant colors. We'll also look at how to paint non-metallic metals, focusing on the axe and armor. And finally, we'll wrap up with the leather parts and some final touches. So without further ado, let's get started. My inspiration comes from the color scheme of the Dark Iron dwarves from World of Warcraft. This color scheme is all about creating a strong focal point on the figure's face, using a deliberate contrast of complementary colors. The violet for the skin, being a more subdued and less saturated color, allows the yellow of the beard and hair to naturally stand out. The focus becomes the area where the yellow of the hair and beard are concentrated, and especially the eyes, creating a visual point of interest that immediately draws attention. While the scheme might seem simple, even somewhat understated at first glance, its effectiveness lies in its simplicity, and it undoubtedly fits our Fyreslayers perfectly. Let's move on to the painting table. I'll begin by talking about brushes. I use the Winsor & Newton Series 7. And although mine might look a bit worn, their quality is outstanding. The tip stays perfectly sharp, which is essential for fine details. Despite their price, their performance is unrivaled. For the airbrush, I go for the Japanese Hiwata HPBH, a high-quality machine. It allows for a smooth and precise application of paint, even on the tiniest areas. Moving on to paints, I mainly use Vallejo. I'll begin with a dark violet base, followed by both dark and light grays, and flesh-toned shades to further enhance the lighting effects. I'll also be adding in some Kimera paints I have. Remember, you can adapt these colors with whatever you have on hand. For instance, I have these Citadel paints, which are perfect for our fire effects, and I'm sure most of you probably have them in your collection too. Inks are essential. Aero color inks are an excellent investment, long-lasting and of great quality. If they're not available, Liquitex is a more affordable, but equally effective alternative. Another option is the Vallejo paints for airbrushing, especially the model game line, known for their intense saturation and satin finish. As a final touch, I'll use some fluorescent paint. This paint is becoming increasingly popular and adds a powerful burst of color to the miniature, making it stand out on the game table. Remember, the brand of paint is less important. What matters is working with what you have and experimenting. Finally, I want to show you this wet palette from Redgrass Games. I think a larger one would be better, but this small one works fine for now, especially for such a small figure. Without further ado, let's get started. After assembling our figure, the next step is priming. Personally, I prefer using spray primer over an airbrush. The reason is simple. Spray primer is much more reliable and easier to apply. I start by applying a coat of black primer. Why black, you might ask? Well, black primer provides depth, creating natural shadows that are essential for achieving a realistic look. After the black primer layer, I proceed with a white primer coat, but this time, I apply it mainly from above. This is known as the pre-shading technique, or zenithal highlighting. The idea here is to mimic how natural light would fall on the figure, illuminating the upper parts more than the lower ones. This not only adds a three-dimensional effect to the miniature, but also makes it easier to apply colors later on, allowing them to stand out more in the lit areas, while maintaining shadows in the darker parts. I keep mixing colors until I reach the shade that I feel is just right for my purple base coat, which will serve as the first shadow. This will be the foundation from which I start building up the volumes of the figure, gradually adding lighter layers. This approach is excellent for understanding in a rational and logical way how to build up the volume in a three-dimensional figure. It's a linear and clear process, like following a path in one direction, at least for now. For the leather parts, I use Citadel's Rhinox hide, which is a deep, dark brown. And for the metals, any black paint will do just fine. By mixing a bit of light gray with the base coat tone, I'm getting ready to create the first light, which I'll use to sketch out the muscles of the figure. This step is crucial in the painting process, as a correct anatomical sketch lays the foundation for making the figure believable later on. By understanding and highlighting the underlying anatomy of the figure, we can bring a sense of life and movement that's essential for a convincing representation. Using a lighter light on the base coat helps to identify and define areas where natural light hits more directly, like the shoulders, biceps, and the curves of the muscles. This not only enhances the three-dimensional appearance of the miniature, but also sets the stage for later layers. Applying these initial lights, I'm drawing a visual map that will guide the application of additional shadows and lights. As I progress in the painting process, these muscle sketches will start to make more sense. With each additional layer, the figure will begin to take on a more defined and realistic shape. It's a technique that requires patience and precision, but the final results, with well-defined muscles and properly highlighted volumes, will make all the effort worthwhile. At this stage of the process, the dilution of the paint I'm using is the same as for the base coat. Now's not the time to focus on achieving smooth transitions. Instead, the priority is ensuring that each brush stroke covers the surface easily and efficiently. This approach allows me to apply the paint uniformly and quickly, establishing a solid base to work on. It might seem a bit rough or less detailed at first, but it's important to remember that there's always time for corrections later on. Smooth transitions and finer details will be added in the later stages of the painting process. Watch closely as I make each stroke with the tip of my brush, maintaining constant and precise control. At first, achieving precision in our strokes might seem challenging. But here's some good news. Just like learning to ride a bike, the skill to paint with precision develops almost subconsciously with practice. Over time, hand-eye coordination strengthens, and the brain starts to weave these skills into our subconscious. Eventually, the act of painting with precision becomes second nature, a reflection of the connection between the mind, the eye, and the hand. But there's a crucial aspect we must always keep in mind: meticulousness. Precise definition is key to the clarity and understanding of our miniature. This work is essential in miniature painting, where every detail significantly impacts the final outcome. I'm continuing with a second layer of highlighting, focusing on creating volumes and light planes, particularly on the arms, shoulders, chest, and hands of the dwarf, who's wielding a mighty two-handed axe. The pose of this figure undoubtedly demands special attention to the muscles involved in exerting the necessary force to swing such a weapon. I'm starting with the shoulders. Here, the deltoid muscle becomes the star due to the tension from holding the axe. This muscle, covering the shoulder joint, gives a rounded and distinctive shape, emphasized by three smaller muscle groups. I carefully illuminate these groups to highlight their structure and clearly represent them. But I don't stop there. The chest and biceps also play a crucial role in this stance, actively participating in the action of holding and handling the axe. I also take this opportunity to work on other muscles in the forearm and the triceps. The latter are especially important to emphasize the muscular tension of our character. By highlighting and defining these muscles, I'm not only adding realism, but also enhancing the visual narrative of the figure, showing the power and determination of the dwarf in full action. To move forward with my third highlighting, I add a bit of light gray to the mix. Watch how I continue applying undiluted base layers, building up this progression of lighting on top of the previous layers. I don't completely cover the previous layer, instead leaving about 70 to 80% of it visible, thereby creating a gradual transition effect, like a staircase of light and shadow. With each new layer of light, the shape of the figure gains more depth, gradually revealing its three-dimensional structure and character. In this phase, I decide to exaggerate some muscles. I envision this figure as a robust warrior, with very defined and pronounced muscles, unlike what I would do with a more subtle character who would have less prominent musculature. It's essential to create natural connections between muscles. Beneath the skin, muscle groups are interconnected by small muscles and tendons that link complete muscle groups. Notice how, at no point, have I neglected the hands or the face of the figure. I've been working on them in tandem with the rest of the skin, ensuring that each element progresses harmoniously. Soon, I'll dedicate a specific moment to delve deeper into these details, explaining how to approach them with even more precision and care to achieve a coherent and visually striking ensemble. Now, without increasing the light intensity on my palette, I focus on applying the current light to areas where I believe the highest point of skin illumination should be. I choose not to make a fourth light increment from the palette, meaning not adding lighter colors to the mix, as there's a risk of burning the skin, making it too bright and losing the subtlety of tones. With just this additional layer, I have enough to enhance the key areas without exceeding the desired intensity. This step is crucial in maintaining a balance between light and shadow, allowing the fine details and texture of the skin to stand out naturally and harmoniously, without overwhelming the whole with excessive illumination. At this point, my muscular sketch might seem a bit rough and rudimentary, but you'll soon see how, with just a couple of glazes, I managed to unify the entire skin ensemble, smoothing out the transitions and adding depth and realism to the figure. And with that, we wrap up our first tutorial focused on the anatomical sketch. In the next video, I'll show you how to unify the skin and bring it to a complete finish. Finally, I'd like to highlight 3 key points. The importance of references. Before you dive into a project, it's super important to have solid visual references. Think of them like a map for your creative journey. They might seem unnecessary at first, but you'll be thankful for them when you need some guidance. Developing volumetrics. Tackle the buildup of your figure's volume in a logical and gradual way. Start with a dark base and work your way up to lighter layers. This approach really helps you get a grip on how three-dimensional form takes shape. Focus on the sketch. Don't sweat the precision at this early stage. What matters is getting the lighting right and making sure those muscles connect believably. You'll have plenty of time to fine-tune the precision and details later on in the process. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and inspiring. I'd love to read your comments, so don't hesitate to leave them below. I'll do my best to respond to each one. If you like what you've seen and want to support my channel, consider making a small contribution through Patreon or joining as a channel member and turning on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you in the next episode.